The Hole in the Wall, written and read by Jana. Zoe was upset. She loved spending the weekend at her granny's, and she had been looking forward to it the entire week, but now things weren't turning out so well. First of all, it had been raining the entire Saturday, and now she had lost Angel, her favorite stuffed dog. Zoe loved animals, and as her parents wouldn't let her keep a real dog, she got a stuffed one for her birthday, one that could walk and bark and wag its tail. She took Angel everywhere, and now he was gone. "Gran," she called out. Her granny came into the living room with her hands and apron covered in flour. "I can't find my dog. Will you help me look?" "Well, did you look under the sofa?" "I did." "Behind the cupboards?" "Yep, nothing there." "In your drawers?" But Zoe swore to have looked everywhere. Granny's face clouded up with worry. She took off her apron, brushed the flour off her hands, and got down to her knees. Then she went along the skirting boards and even lifted up the carpet to examine a few floorboards, knocking on the wood as she progressed slowly around the living room. Gran, what are you doing?" asked Zoe. Surely her dog wouldn't be inside a wall or under the floor. Granny gave the wood a few more knocks and then stopped. Then she frowned, sat up, and sighed. "You see, there are hiding places in this house that not even I know everything about. Come closer, and I will tell you a story." Zoe had a puzzled expression on her face. "When I was a little girl," began the grandmother, "only a wee bit older than you, I lost something too. Now, today, if you lose something, it's not a big deal. You just go to the shops and buy another. But back then, it was different. People didn't have much, and we valued every single thing. Things still got lost, but we somehow noticed it more. My mother lost a hairpin once, and we spent weeks looking for it in every nook and cranny. Now, as I said, we all looked after our things with great care, but it so happened that I managed to lose my only treasured possession, my doll. I called her Catherine, and she had a pink chiffon dress and a delicate porcelain head and beautifully detailed hands. She was so precious to me. I too looked everywhere and just couldn't find her. It was like it had been swallowed by the ground, or maybe even the house itself. My parents both worked at the fishery back then, and my sister and I were often left alone. We would come home from school and prepare dinner and tend to our chores. One day, when I was sweeping the floor in the kitchen, I noticed from the corner of my eye something moving across this very room. I froze with fear. My sister was out that day, helping a teacher in the library. I remember being at home all alone. I shut my eyes tight and wished for my sister to come back that very moment, but I knew that was not going to happen. And so I opened them again and continued with my chores. I decided that it was all just my imagination. You know how, when you are alone, little things seem like big things. I was still trying to be as quiet as possible, though, in case I heard anything unusual. And very soon I did. There came, right from this room, a knock and a sound like something being pulled across the carpet. I clenched my fist around the broomstick handle, ready to use it as a weapon if I needed to. I was scared to move a muscle, scared to even breathe. Zoe could feel her own heart beginning to beat faster. I very much didn't want to move, but I had chores to finish, and I knew my mother would be upset if I didn't finish them. So I summoned all my courage and decided to go and look to see if my imagination was playing tricks on me, or... Well, at first I didn't see anything, but then I looked closer and spotted a dark shadow moving behind the cupboard that was pressed against the wall by the window. After sliding the cupboard to one side, I realized there was a hole about as big as a cushion. Half of the hole was in the floor, and the other half ran slightly up the wall, where the skirting board should have been. So the board was partly missing, and the corner of the carpet was folded up, to reveal what looked like a small black tunnel. At first it looked like as if something or some things had chewed up or clawed their way up into the house from outside. But that was ridiculous. The second thing I thought was, I'm in trouble. If my mother sees this, I thought, she will think I did that, and then I would have to stay home and get fish for the rest of the week. I quickly forgot all about things moving across the floor. All I wanted to do was inspect the damage and see if I could cover it up before anybody found out what had happened. So I crouched down and peeked straight into the hole, and I didn't see anything. I cautiously slid my hand into the cold space. I could feel rocks and gravel and some soft damp soil. I reached in all the way to my armpit, but the hole seemed to go on and on. I twisted my shoulder to reach in as far as I could, but there was no end. Light, I thought. I need light. So I found my mother's lantern, lit it, and shone the light into the hole. I could see pretty much what I expected, rocks, dirt, sand. But then something caught my eye, a glimmer of light, as a small spark in the dirt. I decided to find out what that was. I lay down on my stomach, and with the lantern in one hand, I squeezed myself into the narrow tunnel to get closer. I was almost there. I needed to reach just a little bit further. So I put the lantern down and I stretched out my hand. Zoe's eyes began to widen as she listened. I looked back and I saw I was in the hole all the way to my knees, my feet still sticking out in the living room. As my fingers finally reached the glittery object, the soil underneath my other hand gave way. The tunnel crumbled and I went sliding down into the damp blackness. When I came to a stop, I sat up and realized that the tunnel had got much wider. The lantern had gone out, but I could still make out faint images lit by the light cast from the living room above. However, I could also see a different kind of light, coming from the other end of the tunnel. It was flickering, like there was a fire. I looked towards where the tunnel continued, and saw a kind of a bend, where the light was dancing on the earthen wall, but nothing else, as that was where the tunnel turned to the right. I opened my hand and saw the shiny object still there. I slid the curiosity into my apron and decided to crawl a bit further. There was no point doing half a search. I might as well go all the way. The tunnel continued to slope down and spiral to the right, and soon the light got much brighter, and some shadows joined the flickery dance, and I could hear the fire crackling. I could also hear something else, something that made me stop and once again freeze. That something sounded like raspy, whispering voices. Zoe's mind began to race with ideas as to what could be at the end of the tunnel. She had forgotten about the rain outside and the lost dog. Now, continued the grandmother in a quieter tone, I was young. All I could think of was that there must have been some kind of bandit or other such criminal hiding in this cave. Maybe there was even some precious treasure that they were protecting. I was considering turning around and going back and telling someone about everything when I saw a small foot on the ground. And I would have known that foot anywhere. It was my Catherine. I just knew it. And I was determined to get her before I got out of there. Whosoever was in there, they still couldn't see me, because I was well hidden behind the bend. And I thought that if I peek out just a bit more, they would spot me. So I looked around to see if I could find a stick or something to reach the doll with, but there was nothing nearby. So I got back down on my belly, and as quietly and as slowly as I could, I slid forwards in the dirt, my arms stretched out in front of me to reach my doll. I inched forward, hardly breathing. I touched the little foot and pulled. The doll seemed heavier than normal, and when I looked up to see if it was okay, I saw another hand had reached it first. The granny paused and looked directly into Zoe's eyes. He was an ugly little shape, all scruffy and dirty, and oh, he was small, maybe up to my knees, and hunched over, and as scary a creature as the devil himself, with large black eyes, with no sparkle of life in them, and a mouth full of sharp, pointed, irregular teeth. He smiled at me. At least I think it was a smile. Of course I panicked. I tried to shake him off of my doll until he reached over and bit my finger. Without much thought, I came down on him with my heel and smashed his head in the ground. Then I scurried for my life, out back along the way I had come. But before I could come to the narrowing path leading towards the house, the creature had caught up with me, and with him a good half-dozen horrible things just like him. I kept crawling, trying to shake off their hands. Then I fell forward onto my belly and found myself grabbing at handfuls of dirt. I was in an awful panic as they seized at my skirt and my apron and my ankles and shoes with their grubby claws. They made deep snorting sounds, and I thought it might have been some kind of old laughter. I closed my eyes, and with one great lunge I threw myself beyond their reach. Zoe was clenching her fists and biting her lip. By the time I had finally squeezed back through the hole into the house, both of my shoes were gone, and I was wearing just one sock. I whipped my head around and saw the angry little faces twisting with rage and squinting at the sight of bright daylight. I could now see that they were dressed in bits of our old clothing. One of them was wearing my sister's purple ribbon that my father had bought for her the year before from the local fair. She was so upset when she had lost it. Too scared to try and retrieve anything else, I looked at them for a few moments. They just stood there with their black stares, all spitting rage, but they wouldn't come any further out into the light. I shunted the cupboard back into place, and clutching tightly onto my most treasured possession, I ran down to the stream at the bottom of the garden. Standing in the cold flowing water for a while, I eventually felt it splashing and rushing around my ankles. Then I washed the blood from my scratched ankles, and I took a rock, as big as I could carry, and brought it back to the house. Unsure whether or not it was a good idea, I uncovered the hole once again and found that the creatures had already gone. I rolled the rock into the tunnel and went out to get another one. I carried the rocks in for a long time before the space was filled. Then I brought some soil from the garden in a bucket and filled in the gaps. I wondered if that would be enough, so I ran to the woodshed and picked up some loose nails, a piece of wood, and the rusty hammer. Nothing was going to be left to chance. In the end, I smoothed down any uneven parts before I put the carpet down and moved the furniture back into place. When my mother finally came home, she couldn't tell if anything was different in the living room. She did notice my shoes were missing, and my ankles were all scratched and bruised. She thought I had been up to no good, and I did end up gutting fish for a week as a punishment. The shiny thing that I found, though, turned out to be my mother's lost hairpin, and she was beside herself with joy that it was found, although she did suspect me of having it all along. Now, as you know, I have been living in this house my entire life, knowing those awful creatures are still down there somewhere, perhaps digging another tunnel, perhaps working their way up to the surface, perhaps slowly getting used to the light. Yet I decided not to move out, to keep an eye on these little devils, to make sure that things don't start disappearing again. And they didn't disappear, at least not up until now. Granny paused and sighed again. She looked past Zoe into the far corner by the window for quite some time, lost in her thoughts. Then she turned back to the wall and gave the skirting board another hearty knock. And with that, the wood fell apart from the wall and revealed an odd-shaped hole.